There was a place on the south coast of Wales where the river met the sea in a wide spread of grey mud, and almost nobody thought it worth a second glance. Fewer than 2,000 people lived there at the turn of the 19th century. It had no great industry, no famous name, no particular reason to expect a future. A Welsh bard of the age called it an obscure and inconsiderable place, and he was being generous. And yet within the span of a single human life, that muddy village became the most important coal port in the world. The price of the world's coal came to be settled in a single room at its heart. Its docks shipped more cargo than London or Liverpool. It made millionaires by the dozen, men who had begun with nothing and ended with palaces. And in one of its grand halls, by most accounts, the first business deal in history worth a full £1 million was struck and signed. The village was called Cardiff. From Mudflats to the richest port in the world, it rose faster than almost any city in the whole of British history. And then the one thing it had gambled everything upon began very quietly to disappear. How does the richest port in the world end up back where it began, as mud and water? The answer starts with a wager that no careful man would ever have made. Every city is, in the end, an argument about geography. Cardiff's argument was the River Taff, which came down out of the South Wales valleys and emptied into the Bristol Channel across those wide tidal flats. For most of its history, the town was small and quiet, gathered around a Norman castle that the Bute family had come to own in the 1760s. There was a little trade in farm produce, some coastal shipping, 2 small boats that sailed across to Bristol on alternate days, and not a great deal else. But to the north, in the valleys above the town, lay something that would change everything. Coal, seam upon seam of the finest steam coal in the world, locked in the hills with no easy way to reach the sea. In 1794, a canal was cut, the Glamorganshire Canal, carrying iron and coal down from Merthyr Tydfil to the water at Cardiff. 4 years later, a basin joined that canal to the tide. The town had found its purpose. It would become the door through which the wealth of the valleys passed out into the world. The man who saw it first was John Crichton Stuart, the second Marquis of Bute. He was a landowner, not an industrialist, and the thing he proposed to do frightened the people who managed his money. He would build a great enclosed dock at Cardiff, deep enough for ocean-going ships, large enough to handle a flood of coal that did not yet exist. To do it, he mortgaged his estates and ran his debts up to a height that alarmed everyone around him. When his solicitor warned him of the danger, the Marquis answered with a line that has the strange calm of a man staring at something nobody else can see. He said that he was willing to think well of his income in the distance. The Bute West Dock opened in 1839. The following year, the first cargo of Welsh steam coal passed out through its gates, and almost at once the gamble began to come good, because in 1841 the Taff Vale Railway reached the town, and railways could move coal in quantities no canal barge could ever dream of. The trickle became a torrent. There is a particular sadness in what happened next. The second Marquis died in 1848, before the great fortune arrived. He had wagered everything and been proved right, and he did not live to see it pay. What is easy to miss looking back is how the Bute family actually grew rich. They did not sink the mines, they did not dig the coal, nor own the collieries that produced it. What they owned was the ground the coal crossed and the docks it left from, and so they took a royalty on every ton. 5 shillings for the right to pass over Bute land, to ride a Bute railway, to be loaded at a Bute quay. The richest port on earth would be, beneath all its splendour, a kind of toll gate. The coal belonged to other men. The passage belonged to the Butes. From there, the rise was almost too fast to believe. In 1801, the town had held fewer than 2,000 souls. By the middle of the century, it held 18,000. By 1871, it held 60,000. And by the turn of the new century, 164,000 people lived in Cardiff. For 30 years, it had grown at nearly 80% every decade, swelling like a city in a fever dream. The coal came down to the sea in ever greater floods. 2 million tonnes left the docks in 1862. By 1913, the figure was close to 11 million. South Wales steam coal was to that age what oil is to ours, the fuel that drove the navies and the merchant fleets and the factories of half the world, and almost all of it came through here. At the centre of it all stood a single extraordinary building. In Mount Stuart Square between 1884 and 1888, the merchants of Cardiff raised the coal exchange, a great hall of limestone and dark oak panelling designed by the architect Edwin Seward. On its trading floor, the price of the world's coal was settled. As many as 10,000 men passed through its doors in a single day, and in the frantic hour around noon, as many as 200 of them might be on the floor at once, shouting, gesturing, striking bargains by word of mouth. It was here in 1904 that the first business deal in history worth a full £1 million is said to have been agreed. A village that had owned 2 small boats 100 years before now set the price of coal for the planet. The men who made that market became legends in their own city. The Corey brothers, John and Richard, were the sons of a ship's chandler who had brought his family to the Cardiff docks in the 1830s. They built a coal empire with depots strung along every great trade route in the world and became the largest private owners of railway wagons in the kingdom. John Corey gave away something close to £50,000 a year to the chapels and the charities of the city, and the people of Cardiff loved him so well that they raised a bronze statue of him in front of the city hall while he was still alive to see it. Above them all sat the Bute family. The third Marquis had inherited the title at 6 months old and come into his fortune as a young man with an income of some £300,000 a year. He was reputed in his own day to be the richest man in the world. With the architect William Burgess, he poured that money into Cardiff Castle, turning a Norman keep into a soaring Gothic fantasy of gilded ceilings and painted walls, a dream of the Middle Ages built upon the profits of the modern age. And down at the water's edge in the streets they called Tiger Bay, the world came to Cardiff. Sailors from more than 50 nations settled in the dockland of Bute Town, one of the first truly multicultural communities in Britain, Somali and Yemeni and Greek, and 100 other origins living wall to wall. They loaded the ships and crewed them and kept the whole port alive. The wealth of Cardiff passed through their hands by the million. Very little of it ever stayed there. It looked unstoppable. It was not. The danger hidden inside Cardiff's miracle was the very thing that had made it, that the whole vast machine rested upon one cargo, and one cargo only. A city that lives by a single commodity lives forever at that commodity's mercy. The first warning came from close to home. Down the coast at Barry, a coal owner named David Davies of Landinham, frustrated by the crowding and the charges at Cardiff, built rival docks that ships could enter at any state of the tide. He had boasted that he would make grass grow in the streets of Cardiff, and the boast was not entirely empty. From 1901, the docks at Barry were shipping more coal than Cardiff itself. Cardiff remained the capital of the coal trade, because the trade was still bought and sold and priced in its coal exchange, but the simple crown of tonnage had already slipped quietly from its head. Then came 1913, and the greatest year the port would ever know. Close to 11 million tons of coal went out across the quays. No one standing on the docks that year could have known it, but Cardiff had just reached the summit of its entire history. Everything after would be the long way down. The First World War broke the rhythm of the world, and the coal trade never fully recovered its stride. For a few years after the guns fell silent, there was a brief, deceptive boom. Then the markets that Welsh coal had supplied began, one by one, to slip away. Other nations were sinking their own mines. Ships were turning to oil. The great customers of the world no longer needed the black diamonds of the valleys the way they once had. The decline was not sudden, and that made it harder to see and harder to fight. By 1936, the trade passing through Cardiff was worth less than half what it had been in 1913. Down at the docks that had once been too crowded to move through, ships now lay idle at their moorings, rusting quietly, waiting for cargoes that did not come. The men who had crewed them walked the quays with nothing to do. A generation that had grown up believing the coal would never stop now watched it stop. Stories like this one, of great places that rose and then fell away, are what this channel exists to tell. If this is the kind of history that stays with you, take a moment to subscribe, and the next one will find its way to you. And then, into a port already wounded, came the war. Cardiff's docks were among the greatest coal ports in the world, and that made them a target. Through the long winter of 1940 and into the new year, the bombers came. The worst night fell on the 2nd of January 1941. It was cold and clear with a full moon, the kind of night the people on the ground had learned to dread and had come to call a bomber's moon. A little after 6:30 in the evening, the raid began, and for something close to 10 hours more than 100 aircraft moved over the city, dropping high explosive and incendiaries and parachute mines. The bombs fell first on Riverside, then across Canton and Grangetown, where the railway yards lay. In Grangetown there stood a bakery run by the Hollyman family. When the sirens sounded, the family had a habit of opening the cellar beneath the shop and inviting their neighbours down to shelter with them. That night a parachute mine found the bakery. 32 people who had gone down into that cellar for safety never came out of it. Out at Llandaff, on the western edge of the city, stood the cathedral, a place of worship that had held its ground since the 12th century. A parachute mine came down and snagged for a moment on the spire of its tower, then tore itself free and fell into the churchyard on the southern side and exploded. The blast brought down much of the roof, over the nave and the south aisle and the chapter house. The dean and the head verger had been inside on fire watch, and by something close to a miracle they walked out alive. It was the heaviest blow dealt to any cathedral in Britain through the whole of the war, save only Coventry. Years afterward, the architect George Pace would rebuild it, and hang within it a great suspended figure of Christ in majesty, and the Queen herself would come to its rededication. But that was almost 20 years away. On the morning of the 3rd of January, there was only the broken roof and the cold sky showing through it. Across the whole of the war, some 2,100 bombs would fall on Cardiff, and 355 of its people would lose their lives. And yet, when it was over, the deeper truth of the city stood plainly revealed. The bombs had hurt Cardiff, but the bombs were not the thing that was killing it. The ships that had survived the raids floated in the docks with nowhere profitable to sail. The wound that truly mattered was not made of fire, It was made of arithmetic, and it had been slowly opening for 30 years. The end, when it came, was quiet. The great families and industries that had made Cardiff simply began to let it go. The link with the Bute family, which had run through everything from the very beginning, was gently severed. The fourth Marquis died in 1947, and in those post-war years the family sold off the docks and the railway and gave Cardiff Castle, the very heart of their old power, to the city itself. The coal kept dwindling. By the 1960s, the export trade that had built everything had all but ceased, and the new world of container shipping passed the old narrow docks by. The coal exchange, where the price of the world's coal had once been roared out across a crowded floor, closed its trading hall in 1958. The shouting stopped. The great room fell silent. Cardiff had become that strangest of things, a port without a cargo, a door that opened now onto an empty sea. What followed was a second kind of loss, slower and stranger than the bombing, and in some ways harder to bear because no enemy could be blamed for it. The dockland community that had made Cardiff what it was began to be taken apart. In the streets of Tiger Bay and Bute Town, where 50 nations had lived together for the better part of a century, the planners moved in with their schemes of clearance and improvement. The old terraces came down. The community that had crewed the ships and given the port its soul was scattered across new estates, its closeness broken, its memory left to fade in old photographs. Nearby Newtown, the little Irish quarter, was wiped from the map altogether in the 1970s. Then the last great industry went. The steelworks at East Moors, which Lord Bute himself had opened back in 1891, closed its gates in 1978, and 3,200 men lost their work in a single stroke. South Cardiff, already battered, reeled, and so, by the early 1980s, the visitor who walked down to the water found something almost unbelievable. The greatest coal port the world had ever known had become a wasteland. The docks that had once shipped 11 million tons a year lay derelict and rotting. The cranes stood still and rusting against the sky. The tide went out across the same wide flats it had crossed before any of it began, and it left behind it grey mud and silence. The dockland that had given the city all its wealth had been, in the end, disinherited. Cardiff had come almost exactly back to where it had started, a spread of mud where a river met the sea, and there it might have ended in mud and rust and memory. But cities are stubborn things, and Cardiff was not yet finished. In 1987, a development corporation was set up to reclaim the derelict docklands, more than 1,000 hectares of them. They built a great barrage across the mouth of the bay, holding back the restless tide that had ruled the place since the very beginning, and drowned the old mudflats beneath a freshwater lake of some 200 hectares. Where the coal hoists had stood, glass apartments rose. Where the rough pubs of the old sailor town had stood, there were quiet bistros and waterfront cafes. In the years that followed, a new Cardiff gathered around that water. The Wales Millennium Centre opened its great bronze front in 2004. The Senedd, the home of Welsh democracy, rose beside it in glass and slate. The Pierhead building, that little terracotta palace built for the Bute Docks Company, was scrubbed clean and given new use. And in 1955, in the middle of all its long decline, Cardiff had been made the capital city of Wales, the seat of a nation. As for the coal exchange, the great hall where the price of the world's coal was once settled, where the first £1 million deal in history was said to have been struck, it survived its long silence and was reborn. Today it is a hotel. The room that once roared with 200 voices now hosts weddings and quiet dinners beneath the same dark panelling. There is a strange completeness to the whole story. The barrage that made the new Cardiff possible holds back the very tide that the second Marquis of Bute once gambled his entire fortune to master. The water that built the city laps now against apartments whose residents may never once think of coal. A village of mud became, in a single lifetime, the richest port in the world, and in not much longer than another lifetime, it became mud and water once more, and then something else again. The streets where 50 nations met are mostly gone, the fortunes have scattered to the wind, but the water remains, as it always did, catching the light where the ships used to be.